I'm gonna get some water to this presentation on food and mood. To begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that this past year has been very hard for many of us individually and as a society. So it has affected greatly our emotional being and our mood. So this presentation is just a way for us to reassess simple patterns that we can change in our daily lives and maybe improve our mood. I also wanted to mention that given the nature of today's world, I am at home, and I do have two cats, and one of them loves being the center of attention. So if you hear him, I am sorry about that, and he might pop up, and I will do my best to try to not get him to say hi, even though I know he would love to see you all and say hi. So with that, I just want to begin the presentation talking about how food can alter our mood. So there's different ways that food can alter our mood, and by that, what I mean is different patterns as well. One of them is eating unbalanced meals. So, missing protein, fat, and carbohydrates, which are important macronutrients for our bodies. And also, not having a balanced meal, we're missing out on important vitamins and minerals. Some of them that are important for our mood are the B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc, which are known to lower our mood. And I will be talking more in depth about other vitamins and minerals as well later on in the presentation. Irregular meal time. So, what I mean by this is skipping meals, for example, skipping breakfast or eating your first meal late in the afternoon. And why that might have an effect in our mood is because we need energy. Our food gives us energy. And when we don't have that energy, then our body is feeling low and we aren't as motivated to do things throughout the day. So that's one way it affects our mood. Eating too many simple sugars, for example, candy, cakes, and sodas in one sitting. Why that affects our mood is because simple sugars increase our blood sugar levels dramatically. And then we have a huge fall. Like you might have heard it as the sugar crash, sorry, not crush, crash. And so that affects our mood, right? Because we start feeling again low in energy and craving more of that sugar. So, all together or individually, how they affect our mood is by mood swings, poor concentration. If you don't have that energy, you can't concentrate, cravings, low energy, irritability, and anxiety. So, these are just a few of ways our mood is altered throughout the day due to food patterns or food choices. So now we're going to be looking at how that works in our bodies and in our brain. So our bodies are amazing every day. They're doing amazing work, but they're also very, very complicated. So when things aren't going as well, there's a cascade of effects, and neurotransmitters are not far behind from that. So if anything is not balanced, neurotransmitters also play a big role in having that an effect in our bodies. So, what exactly are neurotransmitters, you might ask? So, neurotransmitters send chemical messages from neurons to specific target cells. So, they send various different messages, and these messages are delivered by attaching to specific receptors. For example, dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that I will be talking about in a little bit. And dopamine attaches to its specific dopamine receptor. Once neurotransmitters attach to corresponding target cells, this will trigger an action to take place. So, neurotransmitters regulate many functions in our bodies, such as our heart rate, breathing, digestion, appetite, and mood, which are important for this talk. And they're mostly made up of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And the picture to the right is, the little messages being delivered to the respective receptors. So those neurons are sending off those messages, and hopefully they get delivered. So neurotransmitters in action. Like I mentioned before, neurotransmitters play different roles in our bodies, and they have different actions in our bodies. So one way to look at them is three different actions that they take place: excitatory, inhibitory, and modulatory. So excitatory neurotransmitters, these are the on switches. So these are the neurotransmitters that promote that message to be sent out and to be delivered to the respective receptors. They, like I mentioned, excite neurons to take the action. They keep the mind busy, so they keep us busy and engaged. Examples are epinephrine and norepinephrine. Inhibitory neurotransmitters, they do the opposite of excitatory. These are the off switches, so they make it a little bit more challenging for that message to be delivered to the respective receptors from the neurons. They keep the mind calm, which is important. We don't always want to have our mind on or busy. And some examples are serotonin. Also, neurotransmitters there's some that are modulatory neurotransmitters. What this means is that when they can change a message or the way that a message is delivered, they are the regulators of diverse neurons. They communicate with other neurotransmitters. Some examples are norepinephrine. And you saw norepinephrine in the previous slides with excitatory neurotransmitters, and that's because some of these neurotransmitters play multiple roles. So they can be excitatory and inhibitory, or they can be excitatory and modulatory at the same time or separate. So now I'm going to dive into these specific neurotransmitters, and these are the ones that are important for mood. And these are the first ones I'll be talking about, but there's more. Dopamine and norepinephrine. And individually, dopamine is made in the hypothalamus and the substantia nigra of the brain. It's the motivation molecule, so it keeps us going. It's important for normal movement and balance, and it controls the reward center. And that's really important for food, which we'll be discussing in a bit and seeing a very interesting video of how that reward center works. And norepinephrine is made in the adrenal medulla and the sympathetic nerves. It's the fight or flight molecule. So when we need to run and get out of harm's way, we want norepinephrine to kick in. It's important for mental focus and emotional stability. And again, if we need to run away from anything, a scary bear behind us, it raises our heart rate and modulates blood pressure. So that's important with norepinephrine. The reason why they're both together, and I'm talking about them together, it's because they both are made by the amino acids phenylalanine and tyrosine. They also need the help of folic acid, magnesium, and B12. And actually, to get norepinephrine or to produce norepinephrine, you need dopamine. So first you have dopamine, and then there's a series of chemical reactions happening, and then we get norepinephrine. So that's why I'm mentioning them both together. So the dopamine pathway, I don't know if you can see my mouse, hopefully you can, but the dopamine, the areas of concentration of dopamine in the brain are the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, which is really important in that reward system and pathway that we'll see in a minute, and the substantia nigra of the brain. And norepinephrine is mostly concentrated or produced in the locus coeruleus of the brain. So now we're going to watch a very brief video on how sugar affects our mood, and specifically how it affects dopamine in our brain.
The major currency of our reward system is dopamine, an important chemical or neurotransmitter. There are many dopamine receptors in the forebrain, but they're not evenly distributed. Certain areas contain dense clusters of receptors, and these dopamine hotspots are a part of our reward system. Drugs like alcohol, nicotine, or heroin send dopamine into overdrive, leading some people to constantly seek that high. In other words, to be addicted. Sugar also causes dopamine to be released, though not as violently as drugs. And sugar is rare among dopamine-inducing foods. Broccoli, for example, has no effect, which probably explains why it's so hard to get kids to eat their veggies. Speaking of healthy foods, let's say you're hungry and decide to eat a balanced meal. You do, and dopamine levels spike in the reward system hotspots. But if you eat that same dish many days in a row, dopamine levels will spike less and less, eventually leveling out. That's because when it comes to food, the brain evolved to pay special attention to new or different tastes. Why? 2 reasons. First, to detect food that's gone bad. And second, because the more variety we have in our diet, the more likely we are to get all the nutrients we need. To keep that variety up, we need to be able to recognize a new food, and more importantly, we need to want to keep eating new foods. And that's why the dopamine levels off when a food becomes boring. Now back to that meal. What happens if in place of the healthy, balanced dish, you eat sugar-rich food instead? If you rarely eat sugar, or don't eat much at a time, the effect is similar to that of the balanced meal. But if you eat too much, the dopamine response does not level out. In other words, eating lots of sugar will continue to feel rewarding. In this way, sugar behaves a little bit like a drug. It's one reason people seem to be hooked on sugary foods. So think back to all those different kinds of sugar. Each one is unique, but every time any sugar is consumed, it kickstarts a domino effect in the brain that sparks a rewarding feeling. Too much too often, and things can go into overdrive. So yes, overconsumption of sugar can have addictive effects on the brain, but a wedge of cake once in a while won't hurt you.
Okay, so I think that video really summarizes clearly and in a very interactive way what happens to our dopamine or to dopamine when we are eating all that sugar. And like the video said, it's not, having a cake once in a while is not a problem. It's just when we have too much of it and too often. And so that pathway, that reward pathway that video was explaining, there's actually a name for it. It's called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. And this, I will go through the little circles and images that you see and just summarize a little bit of what we heard in the video. So when we eat sugar, and we're talking about like a big sugar, like rush or a big sugar in one sitting, like soda and cake together, and often, right? Not just the cake by itself every once in a while. But when we're eating that high sugar food, it triggers our blood sugars to rise, right? Because it has so much sugar, and so it enters our body, and that sugar rises and it spikes up. And then insulin increases as well, because insulin is a hormone that is released by the pancreas. And insulin, what it does, or its role in our body, is to break down that sugar or to convert that sugar into energy for our bodies. So all that sugar that is entering our bodies, that insulin wants to convert it to energy. And blood sugar also has an effect on dopamine. It increases that dopamine because, like that video said, our brain is not it's not as happy when we eat a piece of broccoli as it is when we eat something that's high in sugar, like a big piece of cake with soda. And then insulin and dopamine increases, and then we're following along. But then with that huge increase, there's also a huge crash because our body's using all that sugar. And so the blood sugar levels fall. Subsequently, insulin and dopamine falls. But dopamine, we were feeling great when we had it all around us. We felt happy, right? And then we crave more of that. So it encourages us to continue that sugar craving. And then we begin again that cycle of eating more sugar so that we can maintain that dopamine in our bodies and so that we can feel good and have that reward feeling again. So this is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway that the video was talking about. All right, So that was dopamine and norepinephrine. And so now I'm going to be talking about serotonin, which is another important neurotransmitter for mood. What it does, it is known as the body's natural feel-good chemical. It aids in normal bowel function and appetite. It helps with sleep. And the reason is because I have this pathway, this image to the right, and we have tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid, it's an essential amino acid, which means that we only get it through our food and our diet. And that converts or produces serotonin. And serotonin is actually a precursor, or it produces, in other words, it produces melatonin. And melatonin, you perhaps have seen it at the health food stores. They sell melatonin. It helps us with our sleep. So if we don't have enough serotonin, then we don't produce enough melatonin. So that's why serotonin is also really important for proper sleep cycle. Okay. So continue on with serotonin. Some of you might be surprised to know that serotonin is mostly made in the GI tracts. In fact, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. It's made from the essential amino acid that I mentioned before, tryptophan, along with assistance from vitamins B6, B12, and folic acid. Tryptophan is found in several protein-rich foods. You might have heard, during Thanksgiving, you get that turkey, you get that tryptophan, and then also chicken, fish, beans, nuts, and seeds. So more on serotonin and the gut. So recent studies have shown that serotonin plays a huge role in communicating between the gut and the brain. And some of its function is to promote gut motility, fluid secretion, so for our mucus in our gut, and sensations of pain as well as satiety. So it sends the message to our brain when we are full. The GI tract is lined with hundreds of millions of nerve cells and neurons that have neural pathways that connect the entire nervous system and the brain. So that's how the communication takes place. Good bacteria assist in the production of serotonin and overall just, maintains a healthy gut. And what I mean by good bacteria are things like probiotics, like yogurt, like kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut. These are examples of good bacteria to help our gut maintain itself happy and healthy. And having a rich diet and fiber aids in maintaining a healthy gut as well. So serotonin and mood. Overall, some effects of low levels of serotonin include food cravings, insomnia, and as I mentioned earlier, serotonin produces melatonin. So without that serotonin, we sometimes can have disruptions to our sleep because we're not having that as much melatonin available. So it can cause insomnia, depression, increased pain sensitivity, because serotonin also plays a role in maintaining our pain tolerance high. So when we have low levels of serotonin, then we have increased pain sensitivity as well. Okay, so serotonin also has some effects with sugar, or sugar affects serotonin in some ways as well. So I'm going to begin with step one. Step one, a high simple carb meal increases insulin. As I mentioned before, it could be like a piece of cake with a soda at one sitting, and insulin kicks in and increases, right? Because we want to convert all that blood sugar into energy. And step two, insulin causes tissues to absorb other amino acids except for tryptophan, because tryptophan and amino acids, they need the assistance to cross the blood-brain barrier. They can't do it by themselves. So they usually have these, tryptophan, for example, has the assistance of albumin. And when we have high levels of insulin, insulin takes with it the other amino acids into the muscle tissues, except for tryptophan. Tryptophan wants nothing to do with that, and it's on its own. It's all over our blood. And so in step 3, because tryptophan is not in the muscles, or it's not with all the competing with all the other amino acids to cross the blood-brain barrier, now tryptophan can cross that blood-brain barrier easily, and more enters the brain. So in step 4, high tryptophan in brain increases the production of serotonin. And so we get that soothing effect and we feel good with all this tryptophan. So this is one way that sugar impacts our serotonin and our mood. But, again, with those simple carb meals, there's a huge spike, but then again, a huge fall. And so we lose that soothing sensation, and then it just makes us want to crave more of that sugar and more of that feeling. Okay, so ways to increase serotonin in your diet. Tryptophan, as I mentioned, it's not that it's more readily absorbed with carbohydrates, it's just that carbohydrates promote other amino acids to go to muscle tissues, so that tryptophan can go to your brain quicker and easier because it's not competing with all the other amino acids. So having it with a complex carbohydrate will help produce more tryptophan in your blood or cross that blood-brain barrier. So an example of a meal that you can have that has both that tryptophan and those complex carbohydrates. We want complex because that regulates the blood glucose. You're not having huge spikes of blood glucose all at once. So one of those is having a turkey wrap with whole grain bread, or whole grain like pita wrap with an apple, and of course some water because we want to keep hydrated. And then eggs, leafy greens such as spinach and collard greens, and nuts and seeds. Okay, and the last neurotransmitters I'll be talking about are endorphins. They are composed of 3 distinct peptides: alpha endorphins, beta endorphins, and gamma endorphins, and they're found in the pituitary gland. I have a really hard time saying that word for some reason, but they're found in the pituitary gland of the brain, right here, circled here in this image. Their function is to respond to pain, pleasure from laughter, love, sex, and food, modulation of appetite. And beta endorphins are actually the most commonly studied. Beta endorphins are known for stimulating food cravings. So eating too much sugar can lead to an overflow of beta endorphins, causing us to overeat. Okay, so those were the neurotransmitters that I just wanted to mention because those are particularly important for our mood and relationship to food. So now, how can we promote neurotransmitter synthesis? So we want to choose a variety of proteins throughout the day for meals and snacks. And what I mean by a variety and why it's important to have a variety is because, like I mentioned, all of our neurotransmitters, or most of our neurotransmitters, are made up of amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. So we want to get them from our diet because some of them, there's 9 essential amino acids that our body cannot produce. So we must get them from our diet. And a way to do that is eating a variety of proteins. And like this beautiful image shows, there's fish, chicken, eggs, and dairy as well has some proteins, but we can also choose plant-based proteins like beans, lentils, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And even some whole grains have protein like amaranth, quinoa, just to name a few. So just keep in mind to make sure you're having a variety of protein throughout your day. So this is more additional information, nutrition support for neurotransmitter synthesis, is specifically vitamins and minerals. And just to summarize all of this, I just want to say it's B vitamins. The B vitamins are really important for neurotransmitter support. And I'm going to go through these, but we're also going to be providing a handout that so that you can have with you, and that explains more of the different ways you can get these B vitamins and magnesium and zinc in your diet. So the first one is B1, which is thiamine. It promotes the synthesis of serotonin. So some brief food sources that to mention are lentils, beans, peas, and oats. Niacin, B3. It helps with the synthesis or production of dopamine and norepinephrine. Some food sources include poultry, fish, beans, and peas and peanuts. B6, it helps with serotonin because it aids that tryptophan. Tryptophan needs that assistance of B6 to convert into serotonin. So serotonin, B6, important. Food sources include salmon, tuna, chicken, hazelnuts, and walnuts. B12, I told Lacey a long time ago that most nutrition majors have their favorite vitamin or mineral, and B12 is my favorite. And so B12 is overall very important for mood, but specifically for the synthesis of serotonin and dopamine. It's found in cereals and fortified in cereals and tofu and non-dairy products, and naturally found in all animal sources. Magnesium is a mineral, and this is important for the overall release of neurotransmitters to get that message out. It's important. It's found in food sources like wheat, oats, barley, Swiss chard, spinach, hazelnuts, and cashews. And then zinc. Zinc is important for dopamine synthesis, and it's found in seafood, chickpeas, black beans, pumpkin seeds, and poultry. So a balanced meal is really important, as you can see, because we're getting all sorts of vitamins and minerals that we need. So not just eating one type of food, but eating a variety of foods will help us with this. Okay, so other ways to help us analyze when we are having mood changes related to food is really important is to checking in on your hunger or dehydration cues, because dehydration and hunger may alter our mood, energy levels, and concentration. Some dehydration cues include headache, fatigue, decreased appetite, thirst, and lightheadedness. And hunger cues include headache, irritability, and low energy. So one thing to mention is that yes, some of these have similar cues or similar symptoms, but one suggestion is that check in with yourself, because we're all going to have different symptoms. We're all going to have different ways of knowing when we're hungry or we're dehydrated. My other suggestion is perhaps drinking water first and seeing how that feels. And if you feel okay, then maybe checking in. Do you still need food, or if you need that food, but by all means having a balanced snack or a balanced meal, right? So that's my suggestions, because they are sometimes a little bit similar, those cues. So just making sure to keep in tune with yourself and how you're feeling, because we're all very different, right? Okay. So preventing mood changes from hunger and dehydration. So important to always, choose water throughout your meals and throughout the day, if you can, instead of sugary beverages. And why that's important is because most of what we're made out of is water. So even though I know right now a lot of us are sitting at home, we're maybe not as active, and we might think we don't need the water. It's not hot out right now. It's winter. But actually, even just sitting down, we need water. We need to maintain ourselves hydrated. So it's important to always, if you can, have like a glass of water while you're working, or move around and try to get some water to maintain yourself hydrated. Eat at set intervals is another great tip throughout the day. It's recommended 3 meals a day, breakfast within an hour of waking up, lunch and dinner about 4 to 5 hours between each meal. And why this is important is because skipping meals, like I mentioned at the beginning, our blood glucose levels fall, and so does our energy, because food gives us energy. And so we need that energy to keep ourselves concentrated so that we're not feeling like we can't do our work throughout the day. So it's why it's really important to not skip meals and just have them at set times. And of course, it's recommended 3 meals a day, but just check in with yourself. If you need more food throughout the day, then by all means have a snack or 2, right? Whatever you need to feel like you're not hungry and that you're not changing or affecting your mood. choose more whole grains. So whole grains, for example, like oats, like barley, like wheat. We want to choose whole grains because whole grains provide us different vitamins and minerals that are important for neurotransmitter synthesis. And so that's why it's important to choose whole grains. And also because they help our gut be healthy and happy. And if you remember, serotonin, a lot of serotonin is produced in the gut. So we want to maintain it healthy and happy. Include protein at each meal, again, because we want a variety of protein. We want to get those amino acids to promote neurotransmitter synthesis. And lastly, get your body moving. So getting up, going to get that water that I mentioned, going to a different room. I know a lot of us are at home. If it's safe to do so, go outside if you can safely. And why this is really important to get our body moving is because when we are exercising and we're getting active, we're releasing endorphins. And those endorphins make us feel happy and healthy. And we also are promoting the release of serotonin and dopamine. All of those make us feel very calm, very happy, and just improve our mood overall. Okay, so that was the last slide. And here are my references that I'll have up for a little bit. And if you also want references sent to you, we can do that, I think, Lacey, hopefully, yeah. And so now, if any of you have any questions, Lacey will give them to me.
Thank you so much, Alma. That was wonderful. There's a lot of technical information in this presentation.
Yes, yes.
So we have recorded this. If you missed any part of it, you can find this on our YouTube channel, Food Bank of Santa Barbara County, or by visiting our website, foodbanksbc.org. We'll also get this on our podcast if you want to pop in your headphones and go on that walk she recommended. And we're also going to follow up with a handout that can be sort of a simple reminder of some of these things that she shared with us. But before we depart, there are some questions popping into the chat box. So I will read those to Alma so she can answer aloud. The first one came in pretty early, I think when you were talking about sugar. And Angie asks, what about the fake sugars and the mesolimbic dopamine pathway? Do they have the same effect as regular sugar?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that. I think these synthetic sugars are fairly new. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done how that it affects overall our bodies. So I would say I'm not really sure about that one, but definitely I think it's most important thing to do is choosing, you know, not like sugars from fruit or from carbohydrates like whole grains. Those would be better because they give you a little bit of more of the nutrients and vitamins and minerals that you need. So in choosing more whole foods instead of those synthetic sugars.
Wonderful. And the next one is from Monica. The keto diet is so popular right now. How does the absence of carbohydrates on a long-term basis affect people's mood and cravings? What are your thoughts on the keto diet and long-term health?
Yeah, so that's true. I know, just a little plug in, I know that next month, I believe, you are all having a food as medicine talk on popular diets. Is that correct, Lacey?
That is correct. February 3rd at 4 o'clock.
Yes, and that will be talking more about diets like ketogenic diets. So I think, you know, this is obviously it is a very popular diet, and I think, you know, carbohydrates, they're our friends. We need them for energy. We need them, you know, to keep going. Of course, there's carbohydrates like simple carbohydrates, like the ones that I was talking about that increase our sugars, spikes our sugars immediately, like, you know, like cake or soda and things like that, that we want a little bit less of. But there's also carbohydrates like whole grains that provide us a lot of vitamins and minerals that we need. So I think carbohydrates play an important role in our bodies. And, you know, I think it just depends individually. If you think the ketogenic diet is working for you, then checking in first with your physician. If there's any medical conditions they have to be aware of before you take on a diet. But I think it just depends individuals. It will really depend. But I think carbohydrates are our friends. I would not persuade otherwise to not have carbohydrates. So we want to make sure we're incorporating all those macronutrients.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's always easy to cut out an entire food group.
Exactly.
From Danica, she says, I would appreciate a list of further reading. Okay. Danica, we can put that together for you and we will send it out with the flyer as follow-up.
Yes, definitely.
From Eric, how much water should we drink each day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it like recommended, 2 liters. It just depends really like how active you are, right? But if it depends, I think too individually, like if how active, if you are engaging in, hard physical activity or not, but definitely having water throughout the day helps, right? Just whatever you can. I know it's really hard sometimes, but they have these water bottles now that you can have with you that tells you like you've had enough or you need a little bit more. And there's also apps that you can type in that feeds, like a little plant, so that while you're drinking water, you're feeding the plant, but it's also reminding you to drink water, right? Because you are a plant, so we want to keep ourselves hydrated. Yeah.
Okay, this one, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. It's Brigitta. She says, my sister only eats small snacks all day. She says she can't eat a large meal. What do you think of that, Alma?
Yes, that's very common sometimes that people don't want a large meal. I think it depends again and if it works for your sister, but just making sure that those snacks are balanced, that you're getting, the carbohydrates, the protein, and the fat in your snacks, and that you're keeping your energy levels up. So just making sure that, your sister is not feeling tired or not missing, some important macronutrients in her snacks.
We've got a couple more for you.
Okay.
From Damien, his first question, don't carbs convert to glucose?
Yes, exactly. So I know I was saying a lot of like blood sugar, but in terms, in medical terms, we in science terms too, in scientific terms, it's blood glucose. So yes, blood glucose.
And then,
yeah, go ahead, Lacey.
He has a follow-up question. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem.
Okay, his second question, does stevia and sugar alcohols affect glucose levels?
Yeah, so those are synthetic sugars, right? And so again, like I said, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in their roles in how they affect our bodies. But yeah, they do give us some energy as well.
Okay, this is the last question. So
okay.
Angie, I believe this was in reference to one of the slides where you were talking about the different sources of B vitamins, one of them being nuts. Are all nuts created equal? I'm allergic to tree nuts. So are there other ways that they could get that nutrient?
Yeah, not all nuts are created equal, right? So you definitely need to check in with yourself, because allergies are really scary, and I don't want to like say you can have this or not, but just making sure like you introduce something slowly and seeing if it works for you, because sometimes nuts are mixed in how they're processed, so it just really depends on you and where you're getting your nuts from, because they can be mixed in together in the processing, but yes, they're different.
And that is all that we have. Thank you so much to Alma. Thank you so much for everyone who attended, and watch for any follow-up if you're interested in this topic.
Yeah,
as she mentioned, of course. And as Alma mentioned, we also have a talk on diet decisions, all the different fad diets, the ins and outs, on February 3rd. So we hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody.